Hello, everyone, and welcome to Zobrio University's webinar on budget tools and financial statements. Today we have Chuck Hayes, a senior application consultant here at Zobrio, to lead the webinar. If you have any questions, please leave them in the chat, which is located at the bottom of your screen, and we'll go over all questions at the end. Thank you, and I'll hand it over to Chuck.
Thanks, Colleen, and welcome everyone to our discussion today about, how can you do budgets in Financial Edge or in FE NXT? For those of you who may not have attended or watched a recording for our Zobrio University, we started with Financial Edge. We always show what's available for those of you with still the on-premise version, which is now referred to as database view. And then those of you who are also using the NXT version, because in some cases there are some enhancements there that make life a little bit easier. So today we're going to talk about the budget tools. And let's take a look at what we're trying to accomplish in our short time together. So I want to do a quick overview of what exactly is meant by budgets in Financial Edge, because I find sometimes, the word budget can mean a lot of different things to folks, and it sounds pretty straightforward. But we need to get pretty exacting about what Financial Edge or FENXT refers to as a budget. And then what are the types of budget information that are stored or potentially stored in FE. Then we'll take a look at, well, how can you do the data entry? And we'll go through those different options. There's a really cool Excel plugin that works when you're on FE NXT that just simply eliminates the needs for the old school imports. It actually works better than they did. And it actually can do some things that you can't even do well through import. So I really like that tool, and I'll briefly show you what that looks like. And then the concept of tools has specific meaning inside Financial Edge. So for those of you with on-prem, our database view has several options, but the copy feature has actually been moved over to FENXT as well. So we'll talk a little bit about that. So I'm going to be working with essentially two different versions of information. So I've got my little sample database on my laptop here that I'm showing you for what is now called database view. And then Zobrio does have a sample database in FENXT. They're slightly different, but the functionality is identical. So we'll go through that whole process. So regardless of what view you're using, Financial Edge stores budget information in what is referred to as a scenario. And most all of our customers have the full budget management module. For those that don't, then you don't even have the option for budget records. You actually put them one at a time into the account records. We'll briefly look at that. But I would say the vast majority of our customers do have the budget module, and we recommend it. And everyone who's on FENXT, that's included in the FENXT subscription. So there are these things called scenarios. And most organizations basically have one scenario, and that represents what I like to refer to as the destination. So this is the quote unquote approved budget. So you go through all your budget preparation process, outside of Financial Edge, because Financial Edge doesn't really store necessarily all of the bits and pieces that go into that. And then eventually, once that's all been worked through your approval process, then the results are stored inside Financial Edge in a budget scenario. And I'm just going to take a 30 seconds here to do a quick commercial. So we, Zobrio, have introduced our own budget preparation software that integrates directly with Financial Edge NXT, and I worked with the developers to design it. For those of you that we haven't talked with before, I was a principal consultant with Blackbaud for many, many years and an expert on FE, and then I've been managing our consultants here at Zobrio for about 3 or 4 years. But this new product is absolutely amazing. I think I'm in the middle of 6 implementations right now, and we've got, I think we've got 20 proposals out that we're expecting to sign very, very shortly. So it's going like gangbusters. But that allows you to do the entire preparation process in one interface. But it pulls information from FENXT, and we do a nightly pull. And you've got all your transactions, you've got all the budget stuff that we're talking about here. And you can work with all of that, and you can do drag and drop reporting for regular use, and you can also do the budget preparation. So the product's great. We do regular webinars on that product as well. So getting back to the scenarios, so you'll see in this example, we've got the word final. I'm just going to open up this one that says final 2021. This database is using a calendar year, fiscal year, just so you know. And I just made this for a real simple example for today. So you have what is essentially a container of budget information. Now, technically, it's multi-dimensional, and I will explain what that means. And then you'll see when we look at the NXT view or the Excel plugin, you can actually see all of that pretty much together. So that is an improvement over this, the way you have to switch around the views here. So the budget scenario is completely separate from financial activity. And the reason why I'm kind of emphasizing that when I say it is there are other solutions out there, including, the old school fundware that basically you put a budget in almost like you do a journal entry, but not in the system. So this information has nothing to do with actuals. It's completely outside of actuals, but you can include it in any income statement or report that's designed to show budgets. And that's another conversation. We did one recently on reporting where we talked about some of the setups for that for Zobrio University. But all you really do in that income statement is you say, okay, I want a column of budget information, and you specify that. And then you basically specify, well, what's the scenario that I'm trying to show? And then the system pulls this information from the budget scenario. And if your report spans more than one fiscal year, the system just figure out, okay, I need this piece from, these periods from this scenario and those periods from the other scenarios. You don't have to worry about it. So you come up with an ID that makes sense from year to year, because you don't want to change the ID. That way you don't have to change the reports. And then every fiscal year, you can create a new scenario. So in the scenario, you're just entering account numbers, and then you're putting in a total for the year. And then you can spread out the total across the periods of the fiscal year in however you want. In this example, we just put it all in the first period. You'll see that if I select the row, there's a button. It's a little hard to see, but in this action bar, that would allow me to distribute the total evenly by all the periods if that's what I wanted to do. And you could actually, use the typical keystroke combinations and hold down the shift key, select all the rows, and also distribute. So there are options to distribute evenly, which would just say take $500 and then carve it up. So let me just change it to 600, round number approach here. So I'll go ahead and click distribute total, distribute evenly, and now you're seeing $50 in each period. You also have the ability to distribute by percentage. And in that case, then you'll be able to set up some sets. And this, I actually clicked the wrong button, sorry, while I was talking, one of the hazards of talking and clicking at the same time. When I see this option that says load budget distribution, that's when you can set up patterns for percentages across the periods. So for example, if you were working with, say something that is a seasonal approach, like, okay, we get certain revenue certain times of the year, and it's a little higher than the rest of the year. So you could create a budget distribution pattern, and I'll just open up this one here that says quarterly. So all I did was click load budget distribution. And then I don't want to select the quarterly, I actually want to look at it. So I'll click open. And then for the periods, you just say, well, 25% in period 1, 4, et cetera. So if I were to apply the quarterly with the select button, now I see that I've got $150, in each of the quarters. So you can do patterns. They're referred to as budget distribution sets, if you will. So from a data entry standpoint, one way or the other, however you get there, you're looking at the basics of an account number, a total for the year, and some sort of distribution across the periods of the year. Now in Financial Edge, there are other options for tracking activity that are referred to as transaction characteristics or elements. So an additional record you can use is the project record. And most of our nonprofits use projects. A lot of our government organizations, say a health department or capital projects, they use the project record. So in the database view, in order to work with the project breakdown, you actually have to switch the view. You'll see that in the other options with NXT and with the plugin, you can do it all at once. So I'm just going to select this first row, which is a revenue account in this database. And then from the view menu, I'm going to switch over to project view. Now, the difference between these views, budget view means show me all the account numbers that are in the budget, which is what I'm in right now in the background. If I switch to either account, grant, or project view, I'm seeing one record at a time. So I see one project and all the accounts distributed to that project. If I go to account view, which is actually where I'm going to go here, then I see one account and I can distribute to more than one project. So I'll switch to account view. I'll just go ahead and say yes, say what I did. So now you'll see that we've got a couple different projects that are comprising that total. And so this raises an interesting situation where, and it's a little hard to see, but in the lower right corner, because I was playing around with numbers, you'll see that we haven't fully distributed to projects. So I've got $50 to a total projects, and then I've got an undistributed amount. Now that's perfectly fine. We generally would recommend, in terms of an ongoing data, if you're going to use projects, then have a project that is your fallback for when you technically don't really need one. So in this database, that would be our 1100. And so I could just go ahead and put my 550 in there. But you could leave it undistributed. You will have an issue with running certain reports, because when you have no project and you run a report to show something by project, then the no projects don't show up. So you're better off designating a catch-all project, if you will. Now, usually when something like that happens, now it looks like it's synced okay. Every now and then we'll have a support issue where the account didn't sync correctly once I made a change here. So you can always click adjust account just to be sure. But now I'm going to go ahead and save without closing. And I'm still within the $600. Now, if I did increase the project budget and I added, say, another $100 to the total, then I could go ahead and adjust the account. And then on the previous view, it would go up to $700, for example. You can see the grant from this view as well. But just to show you a slight different view. So if I go back to my view menu and say, I want to view by project, and this is the general funds project. Well, in this view, I only see the account number breakdown. In this case, I only have the one. I don't also see grants if I'm using grants, whereas that can be different in the other views. So just to recap, from a data entry standpoint, I can put in account numbers. I can also put in project and grant combinations. I would put in what's referred to as the budget total or the budget amount. And then I would distribute that across multiple periods. So just to take it up a notch in terms of terminology. So in Financial Edge, you have the ability to track changes to a budget. I'm just going back to my slide for a moment. But I'm going to go back to this budget information options, and then I talk about a tool for finalizing. Okay, so let's pretend that you go through your approval process, and that's all well and good for the next fiscal year. And you go ahead and put that information into Financial Edge, like I'm showing here. Then you get halfway through the year, or whatever your frequency is, and you need to get approval for some new changes to the budget. Maybe you got a new grant, or maybe you want to make certain changes. So you have to go back to your board or finance committee, whatever it is. And let's say that they approve those changes. So the question becomes, well, I know I can go in here and increase this budget scenario. That's kind of obvious, but is there a way to track the before and after? Can I track what I'll refer to as the original budget and then these changes? Well, the answer is yes. So in this system, you run what is referred to as a budget tool. So I'm going to do two things at once. I'm going to jump ahead to the third thing on my slide for budget tools to also then talk about the language around what actually is going on. And so the budget tools can be run in database view. And this one is, to the best of my knowledge, is still only in database view. But from the budget records page, you can go up to the tools menu. But when you're inside a budget scenario, you can actually get to the budget tools menu. Now, I'm not actually going to use this tool because I don't want to lock this particular scenario. But let me explain what we're talking about. We're not going to go through all of these. I just want to focus on the finalized, because a lot of this has been moved over to NXT. It's a little bit easier. So for finalized scenario, these tools simply step you through a series of decisions, and then you get a final confirmation screen. Nothing happens until you finish the entire process. But what a finalized scenario is doing is simply locking the budget scenario as of the time in which you run, the day you run the tool. Once you lock the budget, you actually get a little lock icon. It's not that you can't make changes to the scenario. It's just that the system is now tracking those changes separately. So basically, and I don't think, I think these are all still out there, so I don't finalize it. But you finalize it, and then you can go into the individual account records, and you can bring up the scenario, and you can put in what is referred to as a budget adjustment. So just to show you, and it'll be a little bit grayed out in some of these examples, but if I go back here and I'll just pick one of these will be fine. So in the records in NXT View as well, there is a budget tab or a budget tile. And if I had finalized the scenario, in the lower right corner, this adjustment budget would no longer be grayed out. And then I get a pop-up and I could go ahead and enter in those changes. In fact, let me just show you here. So let's see, this won't take long. Let me go back a year. So let's just take, I know that it's a little thin here, but that's okay. I'm going to take this 2020 scenario just for argument's sake. And I'm going to go ahead and run the tool to finalize it. You'll see it runs really fast here. Finalize the scenario. Yep, that's the one. Well, no, not that one. Let me do the one. I just have to choose the right one. It'll take you back to the oldest one that hasn't been finalized. Next, finalize. Now, by the way, you can't undo this. So I do have a backup if I need to, but notice there's a locked icon at the top. And I could make changes here, and I can do them in this view, make changes to the periods. I'll get a pop-up asking for the reason, et cetera. One of the reasons why I recommend going into the account records, what is that, 401000? One of the reasons I recommend going into the account record is because you get a better view, if you will, of the changes. Excuse me. So on the budget tab, and I'll go back to 2020. There we go. So this is the one I just finalized. So right now, you may have noticed in the previous record that these were all available for editing. Well, right now this has been locked because these are now referred to as the original budget. So the system will now store this as the original budget. I can go to the adjustments button, and then this is where it gets a little awkward. You have to click the button at the top, new account budget adjustment. Then I can go in, and it may seem a little cumbersome, but it's a much better view where I can see everything at once. And then in the upper right, I can either put in the adjustment amount or the new budget amount. Now, regardless of what method I use for data entry, the difference between the original amount at the point of finalization and the new amount for that total, whatever it is, that's considered the budget adjustment. And that budget adjustment will be tracked by the system based on the dollar and the date. So if in, I'm just gonna paint a picture here. Let's pretend that our fiscal year starts in July, like many of our nonprofits. And so then somewhere around September, we approach the board for a change. Okay. And let's say we put the change in the month of October, and we do exactly what I just showed you. We finalize it. And then in October, I put in a date entered of October, and I save it. Okay, that's being tracked. Now, if I go in the month of November, let's say, okay, hey, we got this new grant. We went back to the board and got permission. Okay, now I go in and do the same thing here with the month from November as the date. Those are two separate adjustments, and they are tracked separately. It's not as if they all get lumped in together. It's really based on the date. Now, just a quick comment, just in anticipation of, well, how would I use that in a record? So the terminology is original budget, budget adjustments, and then adjusted budget. That is the result of those changes. So just to solidify that, I know this isn't a reporting demonstration, but I'll just give you a little quick view here. So if I'm looking at an income statement, and I'm just gonna start one real fast here. So if I've got the column for the budget, so I'll just bring up this actuals and modify it. Take a look in the right-hand side, original budget budget adjustments, adjusted budgets. So I normally recommend always set up the column to use the adjusted budget. That's the results after adjustments, because if I have not finalized the budget, the budget adjustments be zero, so the original adjusted are the same. But you want to make it easy for you so that if you ever do finalize, you don't have to come back and change all your reports. But this also illustrates that you can report them separately. So you could report the original budget as a column, the budget adjustments as a column, and then the adjusted budget. And you may recall that each column has its own date range. So in my example earlier, I could have a budget adjustments column and say it's for the final. And I could have a date range of October in my example, and then another column with a date range of November for budget adjustments, and I would have two different numbers showing up. But between those two and the original, it should equal the adjusted total. So original, adjustments, adjusted budget. Back to our records for a moment. All right. So now you're experts on all the information that could possibly be stored around a particular budget for a particular fiscal year. So small comment, but big implications. I've focused on storing this as a fiscal year, which is what most people do, generally speaking. But when you create a new budget scenario, you do have the option to say what's called a period range. And you can do up to 99 periods. So some folks, and this can get a little complicated, so you have to plan it all out. Some folks will put grant budgets. Let's say I have a multi-year grant. And let's pretend that my fiscal year starts in July, but my grant maybe runs October because it's like a federal grant or something. So it runs October to September. Well, you could do, and it's a 3-year grant. Well, I could do 36 periods in here and start it in October of the prior year and run it, for 3 years. The thing to keep in mind is that you want to have it sync up with normal reporting, for say your fiscal year. So however you distribute the dollar amounts across those 36 periods, I would suggest we'll put the portion that you expect to apply towards the first several, well, we 7, 8 or 9, 10 months of the grant that get you to the end of your current fiscal year. And then for July of that next year, then put in the amount for the next 12 months or something like that. You don't have to, but it just kind of helps make it a little bit easier in reporting because reports are always based on the dates. And when you do the report, I showed you briefly a moment ago in the column how you can select budget. But you can also add them together. So I can bring over the adjusted budget with the right scenario final, but I can then put a plus symbol in there, bring over another adjusted budget and pick the grant scenario and say, well, add these two together to show me on my report. And then the dates will figure it out as far as which one it's pulling from for what time frame. So it does require some planning, but you could put some of those circumstances into a separate budget scenario, if you will. Okay, now I already showed you how to do budget entry directly into a scenario. And I also showed you an example from doing it from a record. And then we talked about the finalize tool. So let's switch over to NXT view, kind of look at the same thing again, but then we'll talk about that Excel option and then the improvement that's made for copy. So I happen to have it all ready to go here. So this is our Zobrio little sample database that I really need to clean up, and it's not exactly the same as the one I just showed you, but you kind of get the idea. So there is a final 2020 in here. It's not the same one as in the other one, but it'll do. So you just navigate from the general ledger menu to budgets. That's where I am here, and this will be a list of budgets. And then I can go ahead and start off by viewing it. I will be able to edit it. So go ahead and click view. Now, the immediate difference, which I just think is absolutely fantastic, is that I can see account, project, and grant all in one row. That was a huge improvement over what I just showed you in terms of the multi-dimensional view. And you can't even import grants. You have to import projects first, then the accounts, and then you have to manually add the grants. It's messy. But now with FE NXT, that has all changed. So when I'm doing the edit option, I just preloaded this, but when I go ahead and edit a particular scenario, what's nice about this, of course, you just type in the information. And then when I get to the total budget, I can distribute it and there'll be options and all that kind of stuff. I simply wanted to point out that the difference here is that let's pretend, I showed you a brief example earlier from another scenario where we had one account number distributed to 2 projects. Well, since you now can see them all together, you would split up the dollars accordingly. So if $1,000 were supposed to go to this account and this project, but then another 1,000 was going to this account plus this project plus a grant, put them in 2 rows. Just split up the combinations into their own rows. It's kind of what you saw in the view before in database view, but here you have a really nice presentation of it. So you just go ahead and split things up, and then the rest of the data entry is very similar. Now, one of the differences in the web view is that when you start a whole new budget, so if I go back to budgets, if I want to start a new budget scenario, in database view, it's very similar, but I have to use the tool in order to do a copy. Notice I just have a little checkbox here, copy from previous. So it's real simple to say, okay, take the 2020, copy it to 2021 as my starting point. Because a lot of organizations do that. They say, well, we'll just start with last year's budget, and then we will use that in reports out of FE to help us with the preparation we're doing, say, maybe in Excel. Now, if you're using our new product, you don't have to worry about any of that because we pull it all over and store all that separately. But you can really easily copy a scenario here. You just select the right ID and then go ahead and copy it. So that's an improvement. And then the last thing I want to mention in our time together is that you have this Excel plugin. So when you have Financial Edge NXT, there's a process you go through to basically, connect. Blackbaud created several plugins. They're free for Excel, as long as you have 2016 or higher, like Office 365 or higher. Once you activate that, it's a one-time thing, then you actually install it on your workstation. And when you do, and again, there's a whole process, it's real easy to do from within FE NXT. So you'll end up with these ribbon toolbar sections. So in the upper right, I've got create budget. So I originally, you start a whole new blank Excel worksheet, click the button, then there's an option on the right to sign in. I already did that just to speed things up. And then you'll notice there are 2 choices. I can create a new budget scenario, okay, or I can edit an existing one. Now the edit is my favorite thing. So yeah, you can create one from here. I personally just recommend just create it in one of the views. And then every time you need to make a change, just click this edit. You pull in what's in there, make your changes in Excel, and then push it back. It's called submit. The next time you want changes, you start a brand new blank workbook, pull in what's there, change it, push it back. You don't work with old workbooks. You do this every time you do the same thing. So I'm in a blank workbook, logged in, database I just showed you, edit existing budget. So I'm going to do the 2020 that I just showed you a moment ago. So the Excel workbook will be reformatted for the information you just saw in NXT view, all the same columns, including the periods. It does do a dynamic lookup. So when I enter the account number and tab out of the field, it'll go ahead and kick back, operating revenue. And then I can put in, this amount. And then I can go ahead and say, well, I want to do $1,000. And I'm just going to go ahead and put in $1,000 in the first period. This middle column H is being calculated, so I don't want to do data entry there. So I can type in the number, let it look up, blah, blah, blah. Once I'm finished, then I click submit. Now, if I did something wrong, I don't think I did, but if I did something wrong, we get some red flags. I'd have to fix them. Otherwise, I get the nice green message. Now, let's just pop back over. Take a look. Now, this should have taken effect immediately. So let's go ahead and look at the final for 2020. And there's my $1,000. Yay. So like I said, just from a procedural standpoint, I love this tool, but just start over each time. So if I, a week from now, I'm working on the budget, I want to put in some more accounts. Don't use this worksheet. That won't work. You close it, save it, whatever you want, but you can't use it again. Then start a brand new one, pull in what you've got, resubmit it. And that'll overwrite, and it's a complete overwrite. So if I get rid of this row, that row goes away in the scenario once I submit. So it's a complete overwrite. But you can copy and paste. If you had something in Excel, you copy and paste a bunch of account numbers, let them all sync up, then copy the project, that'll sync up. Then you can copy the grant, you can copy the numbers. You might have to do a couple different copies just to get it all synced up, but you can do that. So it works really, really well, quite exciting. All right, well, let's just recap our little session today. So we talked about, from an overview standpoint, that budgets are stored in separate scenario records. They're distinct from the actuals. When it comes to the information itself, we refer to the original entry as the original budget. If you finalize the scenario, those original amounts are preserved and locked. I can add what are called budget adjustments that are saved based on the date of the entry. And then in reports, I can report on the original budget at the point of locking, the budget adjustments, and then the adjusted budget, which is the results after the adjustment. I can do data entry in the individual records. And I didn't show you, but in NXT view, you can go into the account record and access the budgets there. I showed you the budget scenario view, which I think is really cool. But even better, I highly recommend on NXT, use the Excel plugin. It works really well, as you just saw. And then for the budgeting tools, we can copy. There's also a quick, I'll just briefly mention this because it's a little bit more elaborate, but in the database view at this point, there is a budget tool to allow you to do a forecast. So if I do this copy forecast budget, if I just want to say, well, you know what, take the final scenario from 2020, which we know doesn't have much information in it, take that and then put it into 2021, and it'll prompt me if I don't have that one created yet. In this case, I do. And I'm going to have it overwrite, or it would be cumulative otherwise. And I can copy the budget, for certain periods, but notice I also have an option to copy actuals. So I can say, well, copy the actuals for the first 9 months of the fiscal year, just to paint a scenario. And then forecast the budget for the remaining periods and just copy what the amount is. Now it's a linear forecast. So, if I had $900 over the first 9 months, that's $100 a month, and therefore we project another $300 for the remaining months. So it's an actuals forecast, if you will, for the remaining portion of the year. So it's actually a really cool feature. And you can also copy just the percentage. So if you just want the pattern, but you want to plug in new numbers, then that works well too. So that right now is only available in the database view, and it's referred to as copy forecast. The copy is in NXT view, as you saw a moment ago, but the forecast piece is here. So some people will come up with a different scenario ID for the forecast that I'm called final. That would go into something else like forecast. And then you can dump it over there, run it in reports, and then you can work with it. And then that would then become what's available in FE reports. Again, I'm going to unabashedly do another commercial. In our ZAI budgeting product, we actually build that into your budget view. So you tell us, well, you know what, we're on a July 1 fiscal year, so we like to do a forecast. We take everything through March or April, and we forecast the rest of the year. Well, since we're pulling financial NXT actuals, we build that in as a column. We fix it as the month we're talking about with a forecast. So it'll all be there for everybody to view. You don't have to do another scenario. And then that is stored separately in our ZI budgeting. You can report on that in that system. And I can arrange reports just like in FE NXT. So we make it even easier for you in that product. Well, listen, I want to thank everyone for attending today. We wanted to give you a good little overview of the different budgeting options available to you and a little commercial for our new product. But thanks so much. I really appreciate you attending.
Thank you everyone for joining. A recording of the webinar will be made available shortly.